In December 1978, $5 million vanished from the Lufthansa cargo terminal at JFK Airport. The case named the crew and closed the file, but it left out the structure that made it possible. Behind it was Tuddy Vario, a man who operated without visibility, linking money, access, and people into a system that stayed hidden. The robbery was seen, the system wasn't, and what's missing from that story begins in a place the film barely showed. The man the movie reduced. Brooklyn, New York. Goodfellas presents Tuddy Vario as a minor figure. Slow, loud, almost forgettable. A man who answers phones, cooks, and fades into the background. That version is convenient. It keeps the story simple. It also removes the structure behind it. The real Tuddy Vario did not operate as a background presence. He operated within limits and built around them. After returning from the Korean War with a missing leg, his role was never going to be physical enforcement. He could not chase, intimidate in the street, or react quickly in volatile situations. That restriction forced a different approach. He positioned himself where movement was not required. Behind counters, inside fixed locations, in places where people came to him. From there, control came through access, not force. Information passed through him. Money passed through him. Decisions slowed down, became deliberate, and stayed contained. This is where the film's version breaks down. By removing that limitation, it removes the reason his system worked. Tuddy didn't need to be visible. He needed to be central. And central meant something specific, being the point where operations connected. He wasn't built for speed. He was built for coordination. And that difference is what turned him into something the film never showed. Not a background figure, but a fixed point inside a moving system. The system behind the counter, Brownsville, Brooklyn. In Brownsville, the pizzeria and the cab stand didn't look like control centers. They looked ordinary. Customers came and went. Phones rang. Cars pulled in and out. Nothing about it suggested structure. That was the advantage. From those two locations, Tuddy coordinated activity that extended far beyond the block. Loans were issued quietly, with repayment tracked through routine visits. Gambling operations ran across neighborhoods, feeding small amounts of cash back into a central stream. Street-level collection didn't require constant supervision, only direction and timing. The cab stand functioned as a communication point. Messages moved through drivers. Information about money, disputes, or opportunities arrived without drawing attention. The pizzeria provided cover. It gave people a reason to be there, to wait, to talk without urgency. This wasn't random activity. It was organized flow. Each piece connected to another. Loans tied to collections. Collections tied to enforcement. Enforcement tied to reputation. The system relied on predictability, not chaos. What mattered wasn't where it happened. It was how it was structured. Small, consistent transactions, controlled movement, limited exposure. From the outside, it looked like a business that served food and dispatched cars. From the inside, it operated as a node. Quiet, stable, and connected. That's how control was maintained without ever needing to look like control. Building assets, not soldiers. The recruitment of Henry Hill. In films, recruitment often looks casual. A kid lingers around the neighborhood and slowly becomes part of something bigger. In reality, it followed a pattern. Quiet, controlled, and deliberate. When Henry Hill first appeared at the cab stand in Brownsville, he wasn't treated as a future enforcer. He was observed. Young, local, and largely invisible. Those traits made him useful. Tuddy didn't need someone who could dominate physically. He needed someone who could move without drawing attention and follow instructions without hesitation. The early stage was simple on the surface. Small errands, delivering messages, standing nearby during conversations without being involved. Each task seemed routine, but it served a purpose. It tested consistency. Did he arrive on time? Did he keep quiet? Did he repeat what he heard? Access was introduced gradually. Hill began handling small amounts of money, interacting with people connected to the operation, and moving between locations. But the structure remained hidden. He saw pieces, never the full system. That separation wasn't accidental. It limited risk and ensured that no single person held complete visibility. Then came pressure. Situations where mistakes carried consequences. This is where most recruits failed. The expectation was simple. No names, no explanations, no deviation. Silence wasn't optional. It was the condition for moving forward. What Tuddy was building wasn't loyalty in the emotional sense. It was reliability under stress. A person who could be placed into a role and perform without disruption. Hill proved that early. And once he did, his role expanded. Not because he asked for it, but because he fit the system. That's how the structure sustained itself. Not through numbers, but through controlled, measured trust. Subscribe to follow the next case before it disappears from the record. Revenue without visibility. New York, 1960s, 1970s. The operation didn't depend on one source of income. It relied on a network of smaller streams, each designed to function independently while contributing to a larger flow. Hijacked cargo brought in large amounts of cash at irregular intervals. It was high risk, but the returns justified it. Loan operations worked differently. They created steady income over time, built on interest and pressure. Gambling added daily movement, small amounts collected consistently across different locations. None of these activities were isolated. They supported each other. Loans created influence. Gambling created routine contact. Hijacking provided capital. Together, they formed a system that didn't rely on constant visibility. Union involvement added another layer of protection. Through construction sites and labor positions, money could move through official channels. Paychecks could be issued without actual work being performed. That gave illegal earnings a legitimate cover, reducing immediate suspicion. Collections were structured to appear ordinary. Payments were made in familiar settings, job sites, local businesses, social gatherings. Nothing about the process stood out. That was intentional. The system avoided concentration. No single operation carried enough weight to expose the entire structure. If one area faced pressure, others continued without interruption. Risk wasn't removed. It was distributed. From the outside, it looked fragmented. Different activities, different people, different locations. But underneath, everything connected. Money flowed through predictable paths, controlled at key points, and kept just out of clear view. That's what made it effective. Not scale alone, but control without exposure. The political layer, unions, construction, and quiet influence. The operation didn't remain limited to street activity. It extended into environments that carried legitimacy. Labor unions, construction firms, payroll systems, and contracting networks. That shift reduced exposure while increasing control. Unions provided a gatekeeping function. Access to jobs, work assignments, and project participation could be directed without appearing unusual. By influencing key positions inside union structures, Tuddy's network could affect who worked, where they worked, and under what conditions. Those decisions translated into money, but also into leverage. Construction sites became steady points of movement. Materials arrived, crews rotated, invoices were processed, and payments flowed through recognized channels. On paper, it followed standard procedure. In practice, small adjustments could redirect outcomes. A contract might be steered toward a preferred company. A timeline might shift. A subcontractor might be replaced. Each change had financial consequences. Money moving through these channels carried a different appearance. Wages, service payments, and project costs all had legitimate explanations. That made the flow harder to isolate and question. It blended into regular economic activity, reducing immediate scrutiny. Relationships supported this structure. Contractors, inspectors, and local officials often operated within the same environment. Some cooperated directly, others simply chose not to intervene. Stability, in many cases, was preferred over disruption. The system didn't aim for complete control. It focused on key points, where decisions were made, where access was granted, where money moved. Influence at those points was enough to shape outcomes across the wider network. From the outside, everything appeared routine. From the inside, it functioned as a coordinated layer of influence embedded within legitimate structures. When leadership disappears, after Paul Vario's imprisonment, when Paul Vario was no longer able to manage day-to-day operations, the structure faced a test, not of strength, but of continuity. In organized systems like this, leadership isn't only tied to rank, it is tied to function. Who controls the flow of information? Who manages financial movement? Who maintains relationships across different parts of the operation? When one figure is removed, those responsibilities do not disappear, they shift. Tuddy was already positioned at a central point. He coordinated activity between locations, oversaw communication, and understood how different parts of the system connected. That made him a stabilizing figure when direct oversight was gone. There was no formal transition, no public acknowledgement. The system continued to operate, and that continuity signaled where authority had moved. Decisions were made, instructions carried out, and financial flows remained intact. Stability, in this context, defined leadership. Managing that position required restraint. Visibility increased risk. At the same time, reduced control created vulnerability. The balance had to be maintained. Crews needed direction without unnecessary exposure. Disputes had to be resolved without escalation. Payments had to move without interruption. Each decision carried broader implications. A misstep could attract attention or disrupt relationships that had taken years to establish. Maintaining order required awareness of both internal dynamics and external pressure. Tuddy's role was not defined by a title. It was defined by function. He kept the system aligned, ensured operations continued, and prevented breakdown. That is how authority operated within this structure, recognized through consistency, not declared openly. The Lufthansa Heist scale without control, 1978. In December 1978, a crew entered the Lufthansa cargo terminal at John F. Kennedy International Airport and removed millions in cash and valuables with precision. The timing was exact. Access points were known in advance. Roles were defined before the operation began. It was not improvisation. What appeared as a single event was the result of a system that had been functioning quietly for years. Information moved through trusted channels. Schedules were observed. Weak points were identified well in advance. The operation depended on coordination across people and locations that rarely drew attention individually. The scale changed everything. According to documented accounts of the heist, including the amount taken was among the largest cash thefts in American history. That level of exposure brought attention that the system was not designed to handle. Control tightened. Communication became restricted. Movement slowed. The priority shifted from generating income to managing risk. Each connection now carried more weight because the stakes had increased. Inside the network, pressure built steadily. More people were linked to the outcome, more chances for mistakes. Visible spending, loose conversations, or small deviations could draw attention. The structure had always operated below a certain threshold. This event pushed it beyond that limit. The heist showed what the system could achieve at its peak. At the same time, it exposed its vulnerabilities. Maintaining control at that scale required more than planning. It required containment, and that proved far more difficult. Silence breaks, informants, pressure, and collapse. The system depended on silence, not as a concept, but as a condition. Information stayed contained. Roles remained separate. Exposure was limited by design. As long as that held, the structure functioned. When Henry Hill began cooperating with authorities, that condition changed. His position inside the network gave him access to operations that were meant to remain compartmentalized. Once that information moved outward, the system became easier to trace. Hill's role and later cooperation with law enforcement are documented in sources such as, which detail how insider testimony exposed connections that had remained hidden for years. The impact unfolded gradually. Investigations expanded. Financial patterns were examined. Connections between individuals and activities became clearer. What once appeared separate began to form a visible structure. Pressure spread across multiple layers. Loan operations, gambling networks, and labor connections were no longer isolated. Each carried traces that could be followed. Individuals who relied on distance from direct involvement found that distance shrinking. The system's design, separation, limited visibility, distributed roles had reduced risk under normal conditions. Once a central figure provided detailed information, those same features made the network more traceable. This was not an instant collapse. It was a gradual unraveling. Cases built step by step. Testimony revealed more with each stage. Silence had sustained the system. Once it broke, control could not be maintained in the same way. What remained was a network under pressure, adjusting while facing consequences that had been delayed, but not avoided. Final thought: what the movie couldn't show, power that doesn't appear on screen. Goodfellas gave you a version that's easy to follow: faces, moments, and visible actions. What it leaves out is the structure that made those moments possible. Tuddy Vario's story isn't about presence. It's about position. He operated where money moved, where decisions connected, and where systems overlapped. The pizzeria, the cab stand, the union links, none of them stood out alone. Together, they formed a network that functioned quietly and consistently. This is the part that rarely appears on screen. Not the violence, but the framework behind it. A system that blends into legitimate activity, where influence doesn't need attention to exist. When one piece is removed, another takes its place. The structure adjusts. It doesn't rely on a single figure. So the question isn't whether these systems existed. It's how often they still do. If you want more real stories told this way, subscribe and continue into the next case.